Chapter 71. On the human head, there are 90 hairs to the square inch. That's an average. In Lee Cherie's case, there were 93 or 94, each redder than the last. And hovering over them, like a UFO over Haleakala, like a pan of bacon over a cook fire, there was a crown. Were they aware of the dangling diadem, they might have blazed even redder in their follicles, but not one hair sensed the diamond craft that was considering landing on them. So they collected dust from Saturday bath to Saturday bath and glowed with no special effort. Beneath them, inside the skull, there was activity enough. Indeed, they feared they eventually might be driven as wild as Einstein's hairs from the reverberations of seemingly preposterous theories. Seemingly preposterous? Hairs, you are kind. What was her theory, anyhow, but an elaborate, fanciful, and incredulous reworking of Bernard Mickey Wrangle's beliefs? The philosophy of choice was an outlaw philosophy. Insofar as outlaws have philosophy, they are more inclined to have hangovers, herpes, and lousy credit ratings. Determinists who view the universe as an agitation of billiard balls, caroming off one another according to predetermined laws, have always been threatened by, quote, outlaws who insist on playing the game with their own cues. Laws describe constraint. Their purpose is to control, not to create. The universe adheres to laws only when evolution is static, catching its breath, so to speak. When things start to change again, when nature returns to its easel, its piano, its typewriter, not a Remington SL3, you better believe, as it has periodically forever, then laws give way to choice. Dullards who are law-abiding because they choose not to choose. Outlaws being less frightened by bewildering variety of experience, being, in fact, slightly mad for encounters new and extreme, will seek to choose even when no choice readily presents itself. Lee Cherie, by this juncture, was familiar enough with outlaws to realize that they are living signposts pointing to elsewhere, that they are apostles of otherness and agents of choice. So what was her theory except the song of the woodpecker, bounced a few times too many off bare attic walls? It was the woodpecker, after all, who introduced her to the Redbeards, who suggested, if jokingly, that they might have ties to Argon. Shut up in the attic, taking lunatic lessons from a pack of cigarettes and the moon, she obviously got her lover's smart-ass ideas all tangled up with some archaic Indian tales and her personal meeting with a couple of self-proclaimed extraterrestrials who smelled like the cedar chests who retired pom-pom girls stow the prom dresses they're too old and fat to ever wear again. In her isolation and confusion, she decided she'd cracked a coded message from another dimension. But her hairs would have known, wouldn't they, if she was actually picking up signals from beyond the mirror? In any event, although she was too obsessed with the implications of her theory to attribute it to a spin-off from the outlaw bullshit, she felt the need for Bernard more strongly than ever. It was occurring to her that if she had cracked the code of the camel pack in her contemplative cell, Bernard must have accomplished at least as much. Maybe Bernard had seen things there that she'd overlooked. Even if he hadn't, she was wildly anxious to share her information with him, to seek his opinions and advice. She felt as if she'd bootlegged tape of the Golden Eternity vibrating ethereal choir, that group that sings on the soundtracks of bad movies based on the Bible, and she couldn't wait to play it back on Bernard's machine to see if it still had the ring of truth. The ring of truth being the finest sound there is, although there are noises some women make in bed that are definitely in contention. The tracks of her tears led further than the end of her nose, for a change, and she'd be damned if she could hold off another 14 months to share her discovery with that man whose Red-headedness surpassed her own. So the princess made a choice. She would go to him. Nina Jablonski, the red-headed attorney, had a new baby. She was on leave from her firm. Lee Cherie would borrow her credentials. She would go down to McNeil Island and impersonate her. She'd wear wide spectacles, paint on extra freckles, put up her hair in a bun, easy as toast. Although technically Jablonski was off the case, the guards wouldn't know that. Bernard would be curious enough about Jablonski's sudden appearance after 6 months to agree to see her, and Lee Cherie would end up in his cell. Why hadn't she thought of it before? She could have been visiting him weekly in the guise of his attorney. Lee Cherie went limp, imagining making love with Bernard every Thursday in his cubicle. As excited as she was, it still wasn't easy after so long a time to just up and leave the attic. She thought perhaps she'd better come out slowly, like a diver coming up from flatfish territory on the lookout for the bends. Several mornings later, as preparation for her reemergence into the outside world, she walked to the window, whose nails she pried loose the evening before, and opened it slowly. Not slowly enough, however, to avoid dumping Chuck off the 40-foot ladder from whose top rung he'd been peering in through the single clear pane, searching for her radio transmitter and masturbating vigorously. Chuck plummeted into the blackberry brambles, where he sank from sight, his still stiff member learning rudely and repeatedly that prick has more than one definition. Dumbfounded, Lee Cherie listened to Chuck's moans for a minute or two before leaning out of the window. She began to cry for help. Her cries attracted the attention of a faded man in a Sears suit and amateur haircut who was just then shuffling up the Palace Lane, bringing terrible news from the jail.